Perfect, there we go. Anne was going to introduce Dr. Mark Dixon, but she's already presenting upstairs. So, without further ado, Dr. Mark Dixon from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, correct? That the town is in? Here to school you a little bit on mindfulness and acceptance commitment therapy. And without further ado, I want to save as much time as I can for you. If you have anything else to add, go ahead. Everybody, warm welcome for Dr. Mark Dixon.
Thank you. All right, well, the only thing I'll add is my name is Mark and I'm your entertainer for the next hour. All right? So the thing that I hate most about being an audience member and a presenter makes us do some sort of interactive activity. Don't you? I mean, isn't it just better to just sit there and chill out? All right, so I guess, thank God I'm the presenter because I'm going to make you guys do an activity. But it's going to be the easiest one you've ever had to do. You ready? I want you to do 2 minutes of absolutely nothing, starting now. That's like 30 seconds. Long, painful time, right? So tell me, what's going through your mind during that pause of 30 seconds? When's the last time you just sat and did nothing for 30 seconds? A long time ago. So what's going through your head? Good stuff? Raise your hand if you're thinking about all the cool stuff about your life. Okay, one person. Raise your hand if you're thinking about stuff that you have to get done, that you're worried about, that you're stressing out. Raise your hands if nothing was going through your head. Okay, we've got to worry about you guys. All right. So what I'm going to suggest, you guys ask yourself is, are you mindful, or is your mind full of things? And oftentimes when we have, certain opportunities right in front of us. In this case, we're walking, for the stick guy, and we have a stick dog. We're walking, in front of this horizon, and what do we see? We often we forget about those things that are right in front of us, and rather what we do is we end up kind of getting trapped in our minds instead. And as a result, oftentimes we miss out on things that might be of value to us. Here's just another example. We stare at the tree. What do you see? Do you see the tree, or do you see the mess in your head and forget about the tree? Now, if we're a parent of somebody with autism, how much time do we spend, just sitting there and just enjoying those moments with our kids? Or do we spend worrying about what we need to get done to help them? And I'm not saying we want to ever stop trying to help them, but we also need to, sometimes just stop and go, wow, this is a pretty intense, awesome, kind of cool experience that we're having right now, and I better not miss it. Because, those of us that have kids start to realize as they grow up fast, right? At least that's the storyline we tell ourselves, but they grow up really slow. It's that we often miss out on many parts of their lives because we're oftentimes kind of thinking about other things and doing other things instead of being there in those moments with them. A recent study came out of Harvard a few years ago that suggested that about 50% of our waking day we spend somewhere else psychologically. We miss out on a lot of what's right in front of us. Now this notion of being in the moment, being mindful, has hit the popular media. It's hard to go to any city in America and not find like a yoga and mindfulness studio out there to engage in that practice if you want to. Put a couple of examples up here from the popular press. The first one, Time Magazine did a special issue on the mindful revolution and how it's kind of starting to transcend into the educational system. It's a really good series of articles about what's happening across our country. The second one, has anybody read that book? Okay, it's chick lit at its finest, right? I think the woman who wrote Sex and the City, I did not read the book, but my wife did, and she said, it's about this lady from New York, and she goes to LA to become a mindfulness therapist of the stars, and I thought, damn it, that's exactly what I wanted to do, and get out of that town called Carbondale, but somebody beat me to it, at least in fiction. And then Scientific Mind's another one that has a really good series of articles on mindful revolution. And then in time, recently we see this headline that kind of sums up about 50 years of self-help books, and the fact that they don't really help you at all. And any of you guys that have bought a self-help book, my guess is you didn't read it cover to cover. My guess is your life is still a big disaster like it was before you bought the book. And the funny thing is, all of our lives are a big disaster, or at least mine is. And I'm thinking your guys' is too. And what this new science and the increasing amount of data that are showing up are suggesting is that this kind of chase towards this happy, perfect normality might be an illusion. And it's an illusion of Western civilization. And maybe if we take some examples and learn from some other parts of the world where this is not kind of the thrust of the culture, then maybe we could actually be at a better place psychologically. And maybe accepting rather than trying to suppress the challenges and the struggles that we have might be a better way to get to the things that we truly value in life. So when we look at how this kind of moves towards the kids that we work with, whether they be children with autism or social emotional disorders or neurotypical kids, there's been a number of resources that have been coming out in the last 5-10 years that work with that population. I throw 3 examples up here. The one in the middle is the best because I wrote it, but the other 2 are pretty good too. And they talk about how to get children to be more in the present moment, to be more mindful, and to how to integrate that into the school. Now, when we look at data on the outcomes of what happens with these kids, there are some pretty interesting things. These are data from San Francisco Public School District, where they had 780 kids just do 6 weeks of mindful activities, just very brief ones in the classroom. We see a doubling in self-care, increase in calming, paying attention, and showing care for others. So some interesting measures that might be worth paying attention to in terms of the utility that this might have. Now, I have a number of studies that we've done on mindfulness as well. I'm going to skim over most of them today, given the time, but I'm more than happy to take any emails and send you the things that we've done. What we do know is that this mindfulness thing just doesn't impact these kind of touchy-feely, abstract things like being nice to others or paying attention, but it also has like measurable, meaningful, scientific, validated effects like prefrontal cortex activation, increasing the immune system, changes in IQ, increased attention on various types of tasks in the classroom or in life. And those things now become a little bit, as these data come in, we as scientists start to pay more attention to this, as it's not just this kind of mystical, meditative practice, but rather as we start to continue to measure the changes that it has that are empirically validated, that we can count and that we can see, well, all of a sudden, us skeptical Western medicine folks tend to start to think, well, there might be some positive truth to this approach. So, more and more we're seeing this transcend our Western culture. So it's kind of hard to read the slide here, but if you don't know what mindfulness is, it's the intentional accepting and non-judgmental focus on the attention and your emotions of the present moment. It's trying to become aware when you drift. And so during our little 30-second experience, as you notice yourself kind of thinking, well, I wonder what kind of emails I got, I wonder if you'll notice I'm checking my phone, or when you start worrying about what you have to do after the seminar today, noticing those things and bringing yourself back into the present moment and saying, all right, I want to stay here right now because you know what, maybe there's some value to being and that value could be things that are, doing better for the kids that you serve, being a better parent to your own kids, being more mindful and attentive to just the things around you that you often forget are actually full of joy. So, this sounds all cool and fun, but how are we going to get a kid to buy into this, right? I mean, I can maybe dangle these notions of a better spiritual, more holistic life to you, but what about a 5-year-old? And then let's throw autism on top of it. And let's throw some emotional challenges on top of that too. How are we going to get that to happen? And then how are we going to get teachers to care about this enough to actually do this? during their regular school day? And then what about the administrators that are going to need to somehow pay for, changing this stuff and get teachers trained and make all this a reality, even though there are, tons of positive benefits that could come from it? Well, I'm going to kind of walk you through how I personally have gotten buy-in, and I think that you guys can too, from all these interested parties, as well as what happens when we do this and we do it right, and getting the replications out there, and then transcending it from smaller case studies and clinical interventions to large-scale change mechanisms of thousands of kids in various school buildings. So one of the big things I think that we have to kind of overcome is to try to figure out why we want to become mindful in the first place. So, if it leads to, better health and increasing your immune system and changes in IQ, those aren't going to happen today. And you're going to be worried about what's going on tomorrow. And those things, just like your gym membership, can wait until next week, right? Right. Okay. So if I could try to figure out a way to take these kind of delayed, positive changes and positive gains that could come from being mindful and bring them more closely relevant and closely in time and relevant to the kids that we work with, to the staff that we're going to ask to do more, and the administrators that are going to have to, finance these adventures, well, maybe there'd be some utility to bringing it on board. And so what I'm going to kind of talk about is expanding this notion of mindfulness to something called acceptance and commitment therapy. And that type of an approach, who's heard of ACT before? Raise your hands. Okay, so a lot of you guys. Who's never heard of it before? Okay. Who doesn't care? You're just here for CUs. All right. Okay, that person's gone. All right, cool. So ACT in one slide or less is a contemporary psychotherapeutic approach that focuses on trying to get people to be more mindful because of the benefits that I just talked to you about, as well as a ton more, and give you a reason to want to be mindful. Because as my daughter, who we try to do this on every now and then, says, is why would I want to be in the present? The present sucks. You're making me do my homework. I want to be thinking about other things. And so how do we get to see value in that present and try to accept even those things that we don't want to do, like having to do your homework? So what I need to try to get is this therapeutic approach that's typically done in clinical situations to a level that's not threatening to the teachers to implement it, that's not threatening to a kid who's really not needing to go to therapy necessarily, and then implemented by behavior analysts that are not necessarily that comfortable with this type of application of our discipline to higher level language populated kids. So one of the things that we've seen happen in the last couple of decades is a rise in the population of autism, and you guys all know that. One of the other populations that we've seen an exponential rise in is kids with emotional behavior disorders. And what's kind of interesting about these kids is that you don't really see that much manifestation of this disability, except for when they're engaging in some kind of antisocial, problematic behavior. But the rest of the time, they seem kind of relatively okay. And what I often hear from caregivers, or probably not their caregivers, but other caregivers and teachers, is that these kids just need discipline. They're from dysfunctional homes. They're comorbid with poverty, and this is just all environmental. But the truth is, if you were to scan those kids' brains and look at what they do compared to their neurotypical peers without that disability, you would see stark differences. One of them being significant reductions in prefrontal cortex development, which is one of those things that mindfulness helps grow. Another thing, I showed this slide here, one of the really cool study that was done a few years back was they take these kids and they have them watch a video of somebody playing a piano. So here we have a guy playing a piano. Here we have the second person with their hand on that lid that covers the keys, and they're just jamming along, and they're getting their brain scanned the whole time. They're watching this video. And then the next thing that happens is that observer, the piano player, slams down the lid on the hands of the person playing it and starts bashing on their hands. And you can see the person who's playing the piano's hands kind of quivering and shaking. These kids with emotional behavior disorders, guess what parts of their brain is set up? The dopamine production, the kind of like, oh, this is exciting, this is really cool, I love how that dude's getting his hands mushed. And their neurotypical peers light up those emotional kind of like, oh my God, this is terrible. Parts of their brain. Now, those aren't real parts of the brain, I'm just kind of doing it quickly for entertainment purposes. But, so there is real neurological differences in these kids. So, one of the challenges that these districts will have is that, when these kids get too tough, whether it's because they have severe challenging behaviors that are caused by, emotional behavior disorders, whether it be caused by autism or any other type of disability, the solution often is, let's get them out of our building. Let's get them out of our classroom. Let's get them out of our building. Let's get them to a different type of placement. And so these alternative placements kind of form. But, the truth is that when we send these kids out, we're not keeping them in the least restrictive environment, obviously. We're taking them from a peer group that they may have grown up with to some degree. We're taking them from their neighbors and their friends and family members. And so what happens, the cost of those kids, at least in Illinois and in the Midwest where I'm from, is about $20,000 to $40,000 per kid per year. So that becomes a big ticket for a school district to now have to pay somebody else to do the job that those teachers could have and should have probably been doing. And so, with this coming down to money, what I was able to do was to kind of talk to these guys about, if we were able to save these kids, if we were able to keep them in district, if we were to be able to provide them with a social and emotional support system that would allow them to succeed in your building, we're going to save you cash. We're going to save you enough cash that if we just keep one kid in their home building, that you'll be able to pay for the system. And if we take 30 of those kids, or 20 of those kids, we're going to have about $1 million of savings in that district. Now, all of a sudden, guess who wants to buy in? Because it does oftentimes come down to money. So what I did about 4 years ago was to approach about 11 districts that made up this cluster of schools in the East St. Louis area, which is one of the highest poverty and crime areas of the country, and said, give me your hardest kids. Give me your hardest kids that you have sent out of district, that you're paying bills on right now, and let's bring them back. And what we're going to do is we're going to make their education about becoming mindful first, discipline second, and educate and school academics third. Because if we don't get that stuff under control, they're never going to learn anything. And when we went and dug through their transcripts of what was going on in these outplacements, they were failing every single thing because these kids were not doing anything in these alternative placements. By doing so, we could ensure we guaranteed academic growth and active treatment for those kids. So we got an abandoned school building, well, not abandoned, but a building that didn't have any kids in it, in the middle of nowhere, right there. Google Maps. It's almost as bad as the middle of the desert. Okay, almost as bad. All right, where is that exactly? Well, it's halfway between St. Louis and Springfield, Illinois. And you really have to drive about 100 miles to get to like a department store. So the game plan was we took 6 empty elementary school classrooms, a gym, a kitchen, with locks on all these doors. Half these kids had ankle bracelets. They were on probation, or had some criminal activity. Everybody had criminal activity probably. We gave all the staff 5 days of ACT and functional behavior assessment type boot camp. And if we didn't get 100% mastery of the material and also buy-in from the staff, they were terminated after those 5 days. We also said that no kid will ever be suspended, no kid will ever get kicked out, and we're going to provide them with individualized, personalized systems of instruction so that they would move at their pace and we would teach at their level, and the teachers would be coaches from the sidelines, not the lecturer in front of the room. And the school day was much different than a typical school day. Each kid would get 30 minutes of mindfulness training or acceptance and commitment training every single day. And that would start the day. So we try to kind of center these kids in the present moment. Once we did that, we would provide 30-minute intervals of cashing out points, or they'd have every 30 minutes we'd be awarding behavior points and therapeutic points, like were you mindful during the last 30 minutes? Were you accepting of things? Were you moving your life towards the things that you value? And then we would have function-based consequences that would be delivered to those kids. And then at the end of the day, we would walk them around kind of the ACT therapeutic model to see we would ask them for examples of when they were engaged in being mindful and committed to the things that they valued. And then we would give them examples of when we saw that as well. This ACT question that we want to try to get these kids to understand is the following on the screen here. It's that in this moment, are you not the stories you tell yourself, but you, the real you, ready to show up to what you're experiencing without defenses? Move your life in a direction that you value. If you find yourself off path, gently return to that direction. Now, that's a lot to think about. And if we could ask ourselves that question as we bump into those choice points of our day, every single day, like, do I want a second dessert today? Do I want to have a drink when I need to go pick up the kids? Do I want to not call my mom back because I'm busy today? Or whatever the things that you value. As you bump into those choices, how willing are you able to answer that question sincerely? And then how can we take that level of pretty intense stuff down to a kid version that anybody could understand? And so the bottom here shows that kind of early learning kind of kid version of accept what's going on, commit to the things that you want, and try really, really hard to get them. So this original ACT school had 3 components to it. We had a functional behavior approach to challenges. We had a contingency management system that was linked to functional assessment. And then we had a therapeutic reconditioning part, which we believe is just as important, if probably not even more important, than understanding the functions of the problem behavior. So I'm going to talk about the therapeutic reconditioning part today, given kind of the thrust of the rest of my talk here. What we did was to utilize, the best book on the topic that I wrote, which is ACT, or Acceptance Commitment Therapy, for kids with autism and emotional challenges. So we had a number of kids in this school that had comorbid autism and emotional behavior disorders. We had some kids that were just ED. We had some kids with just autism. So there's a kind of a collection of heterogeneous group of these kids. And in this book, there's 180 lessons that each day these staff are supposed to run one of those days with the kids. The way that this kind of breaks down is that we want these kids to accept, commit, and take action. And that kind of slogan is one that echoes throughout the building of the school, where we want you to accept everything that's going on. So you don't like, you got to do work right now? Well, too bad. We got to all accept the things that we don't like to do. We need to accept the present and being right here in the moment. I don't care what happened at recess. I don't care if there's a fire drill coming up tomorrow. I need you to be right here in this moment with me. Because if you are, we're going to be able to get to the things that you said you valued in your life. Now, valued in your life might be going out to recess. It might be getting some Legos. Or it might be getting out of this school and going back to my regular school. Getting out or graduating so I can walk out of this trailer park. Getting out of the house where my mom's selling drugs. And so there are some meaningful, serious values that these kids have as they kind of get a little bit older. But at those early ages, we got to kind of realize that we're going to be playing with smaller, more immediate types of things. Then we need them to commit to these things. Not just to say, yeah, this is what I want, I can be present, but really actually engage in the behavior to get there. And by remaining present, we will contact those things that are important in our life. So the way that ACT kind of builds upon mindfulness is that you have 6 components to this therapeutic model. And again, I'm doing it a complete injustice in the time that I have available, but the kind of the short of it is that what ACT tries to do is to teach you to be mindful with a variety of strategies, and then give you the reasons why you should spend the time being mindful. That's becoming more aware of the things that you value and being committed to those things. And we would talk about, the left side of this therapeutic model of these 6 dimensions, and I'm going to walk through those in a minute. The left side is being kind of that mindful core, and then the right side of it being the reinforcement core, the kind of the value stuff. So these 6 components to the model are different strategies to try to get somebody to this more value-driven life and not so entrenched in the thoughts that are in their head and the worries that they have, but actually living a more meaningful existence. So in this component called present moment, what we're trying to do is to try to get you to be in the right here and the right now. Now the challenge is that there's oftentimes things that take us away from it. We're sitting here in this room today. You feel your phone vibrate, and what starts going on? You're drifting from my presentation. Anybody drift so far from this presentation this morning? Okay, I've been daydreaming too sometimes. Okay, so how do you get, there's all these stimuli pulling you away from me as I'm presenting today. What if you missed out on something that would have changed the life of the kids you work with? Was it worth worrying about what your phone was doing? So how do I get that kind of these kind of pulls and these triggers that drift us from the present? How do I kind of keep to notice them, but not let them trap me and take me down that rabbit hole of removing myself from the present? Now, kids, especially kids with autism, tend to fixate on certain stimuli, right? And we could rattle off a list of completely irrational things, at least in our perspective, that they're perseverating on, but to them it's like means everything. I worked with a kid that all he wanted to do is look outside nonstop to see if there was a lawnmower that was going to go by. And it's like, no man, we got to do this work, because if you don't do your work, we're not going outside at recess where you really could see lawnmowers. And he's fighting me to keep looking out the window. So how do I get him to kind of refocus and be in the present here, because he's going to lose out on this better reinforcer if he stays entrenched in the perseveration about a probabilistic event that's not even going to happen. The next part is acceptance. And that acceptance is to try to get you to, be willing to tolerate both the good and the bad things that bump into your life. Now, I'm not going to be the first one to probably ever tell you this, but you know that you can't control the things that happen to you, right? I mean, that life is kind of a bummer sometimes, and sometimes it's kind of cool. And the more that we try to spend our days fighting to only contact those positive times and days, the more we fail. And if we're more apt to be able to kind of accept that, there are going to be highs and there are going to be lows, and even when there's a low, maybe there's something that I can find of value in that experience, that I will spend less time trying to fight these things and instead move forward with the things that I truly value. So that challenge often is that there's this kind of pull between the sooner, smaller, and larger, later consequences. If I sit here and perseverate on this thing, maybe I can turn it off. Maybe I can think back to how I screwed up my relationship with my dad. And I can sit there and I can worry about it, I can perseverate on it. But as I do that, I'm missing out on the things that are right in front of me. And those things are things that I really could change, and the stuff that I'm worried about is stuff that I'm not ever going to be able to have any true effect on it because it's already done. And so, with these kids, a lot of times we see these impulsive behaviors overshadow these larger, better behavior, these larger, better consequences. So, for example, if somebody says, you look kind of weird today, I feel the tendency to want, not me, but, as a child, somebody may feel the tendency to say something rude back or maybe to hit them. Now that might make them feel good immediately, but it's going to come at the expense of this larger delayed consequence. And so how do I get those kids in that moment when they're about to punch their peer to say, you know what, if I do this, this other stuff is going to happen, and I need to bring that delayed future psychologically to the present. And when I do that, I can change behavior repeatedly. So the approach needs to be that, bad stuff's okay. Bad stuff happens to everybody. We're all a big disastrous mess. And there's nothing more stigmatizing than saying, hey, you know what, kid? You're going to the ag school. You're going to the BD room. You're going to the special needs room. And then for them to realize, you know what? There is maybe something different about me, and not realizing that that's okay, that there is something different. The next component of the model is diffusion. And here what we have is the approach of trying to step back from the things that sometimes entangle us, that we get kind of wrapped up in. Have any of you guys ever had the thought that you're getting old? Raise your hands. What about that you're lonely, that you're not pretty, that you're overweight, that people don't like you anymore? Right? Nobody wants to raise their hand for all that bad stuff. But my guess is that those thoughts flow through your head. Is there somebody who never has any of that stuff happen to them? And so the question becomes, how much do you let that stuff dominate your day? Have you guys ever been at a stoplight and there's somebody walking really slow in front of you across it? You let them stop. You stop for this guy and he's like going really slow and you're like, man, I should just run that dude over. Does anybody ever have that thought besides me? Okay, good. Because sometimes I worry about those thoughts that I have. So, but then quickly, hopefully, you're like, man, I can't do that. I got to get back here. I got to get ready for the green light. I'm ready to roll, right? So you kind of pull yourself back out of that thought. If you get stuck in that too much, you might actually really run that dude over, okay? And so whether it be something that dramatic or a thought like, nobody loves me anymore, which is such a intimate and fleeting thought to many of us, but it's also something that we could get really stuck in. And as a result, engage in behaviors that would be maladaptive and counterproductive to the things that we really truly want our lives to be about. So how do we step back from that noise? And one of the strategies we'll use with these kids is to say that you're just having the thought that nobody likes you. You're just having the thought that you're weird and people are staring at you. You're just having the thought you're going to get scared at the fire drill today. And that literal kind of step back, that you are not the collection of your thoughts, but rather they're just kind of floating around out there and we all got this crazy stuff going on, but we are something separate. It is a critical thing to getting them towards a better value-driven life. And those values are important. Now the challenge is that these things that we value are really far down the road. And they're things that, we articulate as being important, like a better relationship with our family, or, going back to school and improving your education. And these things are long and delayed. And, talking about those types of things to, a middle schooler with autism isn't going to work. And so we need to kind of realize that if we use the term values and we use the approach of working for the things you really want, that as we develop that foundational set of tolerate some of the stuff that's kind of a hassle to get the good things out of life, even if it's just Legos and an extra snack today, that puts the seeds in place for these kids to actually move towards these longer delayed consequences as their life goes on. And so that approach can be to reconfigure these kind of abstract notions of values into larger later reinforcers. The next part of the model is committed action. And here, one of the things that we try to strive to do is to realize that, you will fail, and you will stumble, and you will go off the path. And so it's not a matter of can you survive without ever screwing up, but it's the goal here is to notice when you've drifted and then get right back on track. And so there's a lot of techniques and metaphors that we use, whether it be trying to get them to walk on a tightrope in the classroom, or whether it be we're going to try to make 3-point basketball shots and realize you're going to fail half the time, 3/4 of the time, but occasionally you're going to do it. Or when you rode your bike for the first time, did it work the first time, or did you fall a few times and have to get back up? And if you just stopped after that first ride, you would have never learned how to ride a bike. And so that committed action is that you're going to lose sometimes, but it's not the momentary loss, it's the trend that we want to try to change. And that if you're committed to this stuff, that will be okay. And so in these rooms and in these classes that we do with these kids, if there's something that goes wrong one day, when they walk in there the next day, it's all forgiven. Nothing is bad enough, even if they're, we've had kids bite the staff, pee on the staff, kick them in the head, beat up a peer, and the next day they walk in and we say, all right, you're in the present moment. Are you committed to moving yourself forward? And we go on. Now, it's not saying that we forgive any of that stuff. And if there's criminal activity, obviously we need to do stuff with that, deal with that. But what we need to do is to make sure that we're practicing what we preach. Right now, as you're doing well, I don't want to be punishing you for the stuff that you did yesterday. But not yesterday, there might have been consequences for it. But today is a different day. Then the next and the last concept of ACT is this thing called the self, or this transcendental sense of self. Here what we try to do is to discuss that, you know what, there are this real you, there is this real you that oftentimes gets forgotten about as you wear the various hats of your life. So let me talk about it on your level, and I'll talk about what we do with kids. So many of us have different roles, right? We're a parent, we're a child of somebody, we're a sister or a friend to somebody else, we're a church member, we're a tequila shot drinking partier, whatever your stuff is, right? You wear different hats at different points of your life. And so the question is, well, if you were to think about the parts of you that transcend those various contexts, what would it be? Is it the person that, you know, has a good relationship with their church? Is it the person that cares about animals? Is it the person that cares about people with disabilities? And it doesn't matter whether you're a sister or you're a friend or you're a church member, that value, that part of you transcends all those different roles. Now, oftentimes we lose that sense of self as we dive into work, or as we dive into family and forget about work, or as we dive into substance abuse. And so what our approach is with these kids is to try to figure out, how to talk to them about this real self that's not so abstract and kind of mystical sounding like I just described it. And so we'll often use phrases like, is this the good you? Is this the good Johnny right now? Is this the real Johnny? Or are you being the Johnny that gets in trouble sometimes? Are you being the Johnny that your teacher said that you were, that's all you could be? So we want to talk to them about, who is that real person, that real sense of self. So that all sounds very therapeutic, very intense, probably. And some of you guys might be freaking out on your own lives as I walked around the hexaplex, right? Somebody? Okay, just her? All right. So what we want to try to do is to bring this kind of pretty intense but very powerful approach to a level that the kids can understand, that they're going to get excited about and they're going to engage in. And so we kind of adopted what I'm going to consider a different type of act, where we're going to deliver this thing in about 10 to 30-minute intervals each day to the kids. That we're going to have, each of these things is going to be a lesson, where each of these lessons is going to try to address one or more of those components of the hexaplex, or those 6 elements of the model that I just walked through with you. And they're going to be fun. They're going to be themed for the kids. They're going to be about growing up and having friends, and messing around, playing with toys. They're going to be emotions that we're going to be trying to talk about in a non-threatening way. By doing so, hopefully we will develop better social skills and teach them tolerance to delayed consequences, better self-control, and so on. So the way that this is set up, and I know you can't read this, it's designed to see more of a visual than to read the details here, but each day has a narrative in which we kind of walk through with the kids and try to get them to talk about what's kind of floating around in their heads. And they're very non-threatening. So in this one, oftentimes we eat too much and we don't even think about the things that we're eating. Maybe there's some times when we eat so much that we feel sick. Eat your snack right now and think about the food you're eating. Where did it come from? How far did it travel? How many people touched it before it reached your hands? So it's a very benign, okay, let's just, oftentimes we eat stuff and we eat a bag of chips is gone. We didn't even notice that we ate the whole thing. So let's think about what we do. And so now what we're going to do is eat half your snack right now and tell me if it was any good. Yeah, it was great. Okay, so now eat the other half, but I want you to chew one bite and then pause 10 seconds. And then choose another bite and then pause 10 seconds. And so as you do that and you have to count, I'm kind of funneling these kids to stay present in the moment. They're 100% in with their snack and they're just there. Because they can't be worried about other stuff because there's this kind of competing task that I'm having them do. Now, which part of your snack tasted better? And often what usually happens is they say, oh, it's the second part of the snack. It's awesome. Well, why was it? Well, because I noticed it more. It took longer to eat. And that is the, what if we went about, and it's not about snacks. It's about, okay, well, what if we spent our lives doing things like that instead? So when it's time to do your work and you're kind of freaking out and you don't want to do this thing, what if we just did this slowly and kind of kept in the moment here? Notice the pencil, and I want you to notice how the letters are written on the page, and just stay with me in the present. What happens is they do better on those tasks. So then we have an experiential activity in addition to those narratives, And so in this case, we might have them get on the computer. They're going to become a snack detective, find out where their snack came from, whether it was made by humans or by computers or by machines. And if it's got chemicals in it, what are the chemicals, what are the side effects? So it's just a kind of a little fun exploration about the things that they eat. Here's another one. Your thoughts are sometimes like a dragon. And those dragons are evil and scary and mean. However, it's the way that we relate to those thoughts that make them evil, scary, or mean, not the thing itself, because the thing itself is probably not right even here in the moment in front of us. We're thinking about stuff that's not here. So what if we were to change the name of our dragon to being a paper dragon, a dragon that was made of nothing more than paper mache? How would that be? And oh, it's not as scary and silly. It's kind of silly. And so then we have them make a dragon and kind of separate themselves from their thoughts. So there's a lot that we do in the curriculum. Let me show you some examples of kids' responses to these exercises. So in this case, the narrative is, the American dream was to have a house surrounded by a white picket fence, and it's a sign of, importance and beauty, and everything must be, it's so pretty on the outside, it must therefore be pretty on the inside, right? Well, not really. Sometimes these houses that look great on the outside are just a facade of what's going on. So how is your, here's the question we ask kids, and it kind of scaled on the level of complexity of the kids. How can a house look amazing on the outside and look inside it looks cruddy? And this child wrote, well, if you're lazy, your house looks junky on the inside. And does this hold true for people as well? And he wrote, yes. So then on the back side of this lesson, what we'll do is we'll say, okay, well now I want you to become the house. I want you to tell me about if you had a white picket fence around you as the house, what would people see and tell about you? And you can see what this girl wrote. She wrote fake on the left side here. People see my fake smiles and my sundress. And then on the other side of this page, say write the you that's on the inside of that house. And what she writes, she's in pain and she's bored. Here's another example of another kid. Here's them, this is a little guy, them inside the, with the picket fence around them, and then what's the you on the inside? That you're hated by other people think you're mean, that you're ugly. And here we have these kids on a different day drawing their dream house, and this kid, made some kind of crazy robotic thing with, I don't know what this is, a laser beam to kill people on top of it, I'm not sure. Then we say, okay, now write what your values are and how they surround you, and this child wrote his family. And then we say, now draw, this is your dream house here, now draw your current house. And you see he's got this little tiny trailer that he lives in. And, I could just go on and on with these slides of the things that these kids do that are just, they speak volumes to the things that we're kind of, revealing in them and the struggles that they have. This one is, noticing your emotions. Have you ever thought your life was a mess? What was going on when this happened? It says, when a guy from my school did not like me. And did you let that consume you, or did you notice what was there and make a decision to move forward, to accept, to be committed to the things that you value, move forward? So I move forward because I don't care about him anymore. I could just go on and on. Let me just share one more of you. Another lesson in there is like we talk about eclipses, and eclipse is kind of cool, and let's get online and look at what an eclipse is. And sometimes bad things eclipse the good stuff in our lives. And sometimes bad, these things are there, but just like an eclipse, they move past us very quickly. And if we sit there and keep staring and hoping for the eclipse to happen again, it doesn't, because it's done. And you can see what this girl wrote. So, what happened? So this is all cool and fun sounding. What are the outcomes? So when we ran this thing for the first year with these kids, we took 9 kids in the school that met our criterion in terms of disability, age, socioeconomic status, and we found 9 other kids that were on the wait list to come to the school, but that weren't that severe enough to be the first group that we brought in. And so we looked at outcomes of like 1 year before and then 1 year of actual implementation in the school, and we looked at GPA attendance and positive changes in AAQ scores, which is a measure of what we call psychological flexibility. So we wanted to look to see whether or not these kids were surviving in school. And so here are the data. This is the percentage of attendance. Our treatment group went from 60% attendance before they came to the school to over 95% attendance during the year that they were there. Now, we didn't force attendance, we didn't put truancy officers out, we didn't call parents, we didn't do anything different. We just looked to see if they showed. These kids wanted to come. Our control group wasn't that bad, remember, they were kind of not the most high-risk kids. And what we see is that their attendance dropped over the year that they waited. They were getting ready to come to our school. Grade point average. Control. Treatment. Now, the thing about grade point average, which is important for me to stress, is that we didn't just give them easy stuff so they pass classes and we could bump this GPA. This GPA was determined by the performance on a personalized system of instruction or computer-based credit recovery systems. So the instructor couldn't fake the grade, or the teachers couldn't say, oh, well, you're doing great, I'm giving you an A. It was on work completion. So the truth is what we see is these kids are actually completing work while their peer group is not. And then here's their AFQ scores. We see that the treatment group went down. Wait, let me think this here. Yeah, the control group got. I'm sorry. This is the beginning of the year versus the end of the year for the year that they're in the school. Treatment group were way worse. You want low scores here, and we see that the treatment group's going down a little bit. Here's the behavior points that they're earning in the classroom. This is the entire school trend over a year. And then we got just a little bit of time left. I just want to show you a couple more slides of how the school actually looks. So here's, we have this ACT model. It's spray painted on the walls. Every kid, makes their own head and then puts the hexaflux inside of their head and then writes, what this stuff means to them. In the diagrams, we track what they buy in the classroom store each week, or each day actually, and whether it's attention, escape, tangible, or sensory based. We look at what they're cashing in for. If they're buying small, sooner stuff, they're buying larger, later stuff as an indicator of whether they're developing more self-control and less impulsivity. We give them delayed discounting tasks where we ask them about hypothetical amounts of money. Would you rather have $100 now or $100 in a week, $75 now, $100 or $750 now, $100 in a week, $500 now, and all these various permutations of the task. And what we find is that on the first day of school, when entering into the building, they are very impulsive. What's closer to the x, this is the whole school aggregated. What's closer to the x-axis is a metric of impulsivity, and the higher you are towards the top of this graph, the less impulsive you are on this task. We see significant changes in these kids in terms of an objective measure of self-control. There's a few other things that I could show you, but I want to hop right now. I know we kind of started a little bit late, so I want to kind of keep us on time. A variety of ways that these teachers kind of transfer the knowledge of these ACT sessions into kind of the bulletin boards and the signs and the symbols all around their classrooms. You can see here, ACT is acknowledge what's going on, choose a value direction, and take action based on your choice. This is probably the world's biggest hexaflux. This is like 6 feet by 8 feet that somebody made into a big flag that they fly outside the school. There's more lessons. I'm just going to show you one other kind of tidbit here of how we've moved this thing from just one school to bigger scaled systems. Every summer now at SIU where I work, we offer a mindfulness and acceptance camp for kids that have disabilities or are regular neurotypical peers. And at that camp, we do it's 30 hours long. And we figured if we could take this ACT school model and reduce it down to a recreational camp, if we could scale it down to this kind of mainstream, could we be able to scale it back up to large groups of kids that might not necessarily have severe challenging behaviors? And if we could do so in a week and get measurable changes, that would be pretty awesome. So we had 17 kids in this camp. They were 7 to 12 years old. We did 9 to 3, 30 total hours. They did all this, they did yoga. They did the ACT curriculum from the book that we had. We did a bunch of outdoor exploration type things with them, and saw some meaningful measurable changes in just 1 week compared to a control group We had scripts every day for the therapist to implement with these kids. We had specific mindfulness activities. We scored them on a variety of things. In this case, an action or acceptance and fusion questionnaire for kids. You know, you can see some. I'm not going to read all this, but I must get rid of my worries and my fears so I can have a good life. Try hard to erase the memories that are from my mind. I can't stand to feel pain or hurt in my body. My heart beats fast. There must be something wrong with me. So we look to see how they score on this thing. And when we look at them compared to a control group, what we want to see is drops in the scores. So here's before the camp, here's 1 week later, here's a control group in the plaid, and here's the treatment group in the black bars. You can see a change for the treatment group and no change for the control group. We also had another scale that looked at their mindfulness awareness abilities, and here we see changes. We want to see changes go up, and we see changes in the treatment group going up, and we see changes in the control group going down. So they're getting less mindful, and this is again in 30 hours of treatment. Did the parents like it? Everybody said yeah, they'd come back. So I'm going to just go to one last thing here. We did it with staff. And now the newest thing that we've been doing, and I'd be happy to kind of talk to anybody that cares about this later about it, is that we've now put this ACT approach into an RTI model. So we've scaled it from in a tier 1, tier 2, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 system, so that every teacher in every building and every school could actually adopt this if they wanted to. And depending on the severity of the kids they work with, they could either go in with a couple minutes of ACT and mindfulness as something that would take about 10 minutes, or something that would take about 20 to 30 minutes to do. And so we have this happening right now in 2 school districts with about 2,000 kids, and we got another 2,000 kids, 2 other districts that are serving as our control group. And so we'll have all these data by the end of the year. This is kind of a close-up of what this looks like. So here, here's one day. It's thought the theme is thought bubbles. Have you ever seen an illustration of a person with thought bubbles coming out of their head, showing you what in that moment they're thinking? And just like a bubble, a thought comes and it floats by for a while, and then pop, it's gone. And so at tier 1, this is all that they're getting. They're just getting this at the beginning of the day. They're just kind of, every kid in the room is going to hear this utterance from the teacher or on the announcements from the principal, and we're all going to just kind of sit there and think about it for a couple minutes, and then we're done. Tier 2, there's going to be a little bit more activity. In tier 3, we're going to do even more intensive intervention along this theme. So we do this for the entire school year. So in summary, I think that ACT can be successful when implemented in school educational settings for both regular ed kids and special needs kids. That it needs to be sold as something oftentimes as less therapeutic than this one-on-one therapy. Even though we can do that, and we've done it, I'm going to show you a video in a second of us doing some of these one-on-one with kids with autism. But it can be something that we can transcend from that kind of talk therapy approach to a more broader definition of a mindful education. And when we do that, we will get outcomes that are meaningful and measurable, whether they be self-reports, whether they be changes in attention to task, whether they be transmitter changes or immune system changes. These things are real, and they're powerful, and they have the ability to change the lives of the kids that we work with. And as we move more from just clinical populations to the mainstream, we're going to be able to scale this stuff up in ways that I don't think we ever thought were possible before.